Life is a series of crucial conversations. Some are good, some are bad. Some are memorable, and some are just forgettable. But there are a few conversations in life that transcend being just memorable. They actually change things. They change the way you believe, the way you think, and the way you act. In the times of Jesus, people's lives were literally flipped upside down after a conversation with him. Jesus loved having those crucial conversations then, and he still loves having them today.
Well, good morning, Redemption. How are you guys? Good, man. You look good. You sound good this morning. We're glad you guys came to hang out with us and worship a little bit. It's good to have you here. And if this is your first time here, I want to welcome you too and just let you know, we know sometimes when you walk into a new environment, there's a lot of people, there's a ton of stuff going on that it can be maybe a little bit intimidating. You may have a lot of questions, or maybe it's not intimidating at all and you love meeting new people and that's totally your thing. But either way, I would encourage you to make your way out to Next Steps. As soon as service is over, there's a table out in the lobby at either of our campuses, so Jasper or Lagodi. And there's people there who would love to help answer those questions and get to know you and help do everything they can to make this place feel a little bit more like home. But today, we're jumping into week 2 of our series called Encounters. In this series, we're kind of looking at the different encounters and the different conversations that Jesus had with a lot of different people from all different walks of life, people a lot like me and you and like the people that we interact with every single day. And our hope is that in this series that we come to see Jesus for more than just the way that we've always assumed him to be. Because see, what can happen is that we can get this idea of who God is, and we can come up with this blanket definition for who Jesus is. And maybe that's something you picked up from when you were a kid and something that someone else told you. Or maybe it's things that you picked up along the way from different churches you've been to or the different church people that you've interacted with. But you kind of get this idea about who God is, and you see him from one angle. And the problem is that a lot of times that idea of God and that definition of Jesus is that he's just kind of boring. And we end up with a Jesus that's sort of inconsequential to our lives. But the truth is that as we open up the Bible and we look at who he was and the life that he lived, is that Jesus was far from boring and he was far from inconsequential. And so in week 1, we started off looking at Jesus and the skeptic, right? Daryl preached this last week. It was a great message. We looked at a guy by the name of Nathaniel. And Nathaniel had a lot of doubts and a lot of questions about who Jesus was. And he wasn't going to just take what other people had told him about Jesus and believe that. He needed more. And so his friend didn't argue with him, and he didn't try to convince him that, he was right and Nathaniel was wrong, or even answer all of his questions. He just simply said to Nathaniel, "Come and see." Right? Don't take my word for it, but come and meet Jesus for yourself. Come and see this guy and see who he really is. And for us, oftentimes, that's the best thing that we can do for other people, is not to argue with them, not to try to out-reason them or any of that stuff, but just to simply invite them to come and see who Jesus is. Come see him for yourself. So if you missed that message, I would encourage you to go back and check that out from last Sunday. Really great stuff. It's in John chapter 1. But this week, we're going to be looking at Jesus and the scholar. All right, Jesus and the scholar. And so it's going to be in John chapter 3. And if you've got a Bible or a Bible app, you can go on and flip over there to the 3rd chapter of John. It's in the New Testament. John's the 4th book in the New Testament, so you can kind of look that up real quick. But before we jump into that, before we start talking about it, I want us to ask a really simple question. All right, and it's kind of a fun one that I've been asking this week, all right? When did you find out that your family is weird? All right, when did you realize that your family is weird? All right? Because here's the thing, is we all come to this realization at some point, right? Like you were growing up and you thought that everything was normal, right? Everybody does things this way, everyone has these traditions, everyone does things the way that we do them or the way that I do them, but then you realize that I'm not normal, I'm weird. All right, and maybe, all right, you realized this when you were growing up and you had a sleepover and friends came over to your house for the first time and they pointed things out. They're like, my family doesn't do things like your family, all right? And you realize you're a little bit weird. Or maybe it's when you go to college, right? You get away from home for the first time. Maybe you've got a roommate or, someone else is around and they see like the way that you do life and they point out that like, man, that's really weird. Or maybe it's when you get that significant other, right? And they come to meet your family for the first time and they're just like, oh, this explains so much. Like, I get it now, right? But you realize that you're a little bit weird. You're not normal, all right? Well, here's the thing. I've been asking this question all week, and it's been kind of fun to hear people's like different responses. Everything from holidays and birthdays and the way they celebrate things to the way people hang toilet paper. All right, a lot of disagreement about what's right and what's wrong about the way that we do that. I had one person on staff who grew up dipping her chicken nuggets in applesauce. Like, that was normal, and that's really weird, all right? There was a guy that I went to college with that growing up, his mom kept all of their toenail clippings. I know, right? Like, that's what we did. That's what we did right there, right? But for me, all right, I realized my family was a little bit weird, but it's when I was growing up, my family was like a lot of other families, and that, there'd been some divorce and some broken family stuff going on there, and so we were kind of pieced together, and we were a happy little family. We loved each other, but my mom and dad had both been married before they got married to each other. And so when they got together, my mom already had 2 kids that she brought into that relationship, my older brother and sister. Now, they're only half siblings. We have the same mom, but different dads. But we grew up like as siblings and just like any other siblings. That's all we've ever known. But here's the thing. My dad was not their dad. And so when they referred to our parents, they would say Mom and Gary. All right, well, I learned a lot from them, and I took my cues from my older brother and sister. And so until I was about 8 years old, I called my parents Mom and Gary. Like, I thought everyone had a Mom and Gary. Like, that was normal. That was what everyone did. And so it wasn't until I was 8 that I had a friend over, and we're hanging out, and I don't even remember what, but I said something to my dad, except I referred to him as Gary. And my friend looked at me and he was like, you call your dad by his name? Like, you call him Gary? And it was like glass shattered. And I was like, I'm weird. Like, that's not normal, And so from then on, it was like, you are now dad. I will call you this. And like, that was, I made the change because I realized it was weird. What do you think? We've all got weird things, right? We've all got things in our families, whether it's traditions and holidays or any of that stuff. We've all got some weird things that aren't normal. And the truth is that's true in so many other areas of our lives. Right, like if you think back to your first job, remember your first day there and it's overwhelming and you don't know where things are and you're not really sure what to do and it's kind of crazy. But over time, right, you're there for a while, you figure things out and it gets normal, right? You know where the copy room is and you know who to avoid in the hallway because she'll talk all day long and you realize all those things and it becomes more normal. You get used to it. Same thing like when you were in school, right? You remember your freshman year and things again are overwhelming and you can't get your locker to open. You don't know where your classes are and it's just everything is new and it's different. But over time, by the time you're a senior, everything's normal. And you know who the teachers are and you know where hallways to go down and you know all of this stuff because everything kind of gets normal. See, the same thing can happen in church, is that the longer we're here and the longer we do this thing right now, over time it becomes really, really normal and really, really routine. And so even this morning, if you are new and this is your first time and this all does seem different, it's a little bit weird. If you're here long enough and you keep coming, eventually it's going to get normal and eventually it's going to feel like routine. And the truth is that's why the church is a really dangerous place to grow up. Now, we don't think of it like that, right? Like we think like growing up on the streets, like that's really dangerous, but why would growing up in church be a dangerous place to grow up? Well, the reason is because things get really normal and it gets really routine and we start to think that God is just normal and he doesn't really shock us anymore. And Jesus is no longer spectacular, he's just Jesus. And the gospel is no longer amazing, it's just the story. The truth is, as we read it and we dive into this, all right, God is anything but normal, and Jesus is anything but average, and the gospel should absolutely shock us and blow us away every time we read it. And so my hope today as we dive into John chapter 3 is that we're going to see Jesus' conversation with a skeptic, with a scholar, with a guy who was a church goer, all right? That's what he did. He grew up going to church, and it was very normal to him. But through his conversation with Jesus, Jesus says some things that challenge him and change him. And it's my hope that that same conversation, those same words, will challenge and change us today. So in John chapter 3, we're going to pick it up in verses 1 and 2 as this is our story. It says, there was a man named Nicodemus, a Jewish religious leader who was a Pharisee. And after dark one evening, he came to speak with Jesus. Rabbi, he said, We all know that God has sent you to teach us. Your miraculous signs are evidence that God is with you. Now, right off the bat, okay, this tells us some details about who Nicodemus is. Right? And we see first off that Nicodemus is a Pharisee. Now, if you've been around church or been around the Bible or, heard sermons before, you know that usually we look at the Pharisees and we identify them as the bad guys, right? Like the Pharisees are sort of like the Darth Vader to Jesus' Skywalker, right? Like they're the Thanos to Jesus' Captain America. Like they're the bad guys, all right? But the truth is that Nicodemus wasn't really a bad guy. He was actually a pretty good guy. Like he grew up studying the Bible. He had gone to school to study the Bible, and he was really good at it. He had like the highest God SAT score, right? Like he was better than everyone else. Like he did great at that stuff. And, he was the guy that your mom wanted you to grow up and to be like. Like Nicodemus was a pretty good guy. But the other thing this tells us is that Nicodemus came to meet Jesus at night. Now, that could be because he had to work late, and this was the only time he could get away to meet with Jesus. Like, the text doesn't really say, but I don't think that's the case. I think the reason that Nicodemus came at night was because he wanted to kind of keep it a secret. See, I think back to when I was a teenager, kind of growing up, and do you know when I did most of the things that I wasn't supposed to do? Did them at nighttime, right? Because in the dark, you can keep things a secret that no one finds out about, and you can kind of make sure that no one does. I think that's the reason Nicodemus came at night to meet Jesus, is because he didn't want anyone to find out that he was meeting with Jesus. All right, now here's the other thing, is that Nicodemus kind of comes and he's flattering Jesus, and he comes with compliments, and he says, he calls him Rabbi, which is this really like honoring name, and he talks about how miraculous he is and his teaching and just how awesome Jesus is, and he's really just kind of buttering him up. And the reason is because he's kind of recruiting Jesus. He's like, Jesus, don't you realize that like you could be in our club? Like you could be a Pharisee, you could be a religious elite, you could be like me. Don't you want to do that? Well, Jesus isn't really buying into that. He didn't come to meet with Nicodemus in order to be flattered, in order to get compliments. See, here's what we kind of find out about Jesus, is that when you come to Jesus humbly and you come to him with nothing, then he's really, really, really patient. But when you come to Jesus with all the answers, and you come to Jesus claiming to know everything about God, Jesus has a way of just cutting straight through all of that right to your heart. And so Jesus doesn't play games. Look at what he says to Nicodemus in verse 3. Jesus replied, I tell you the truth, unless you are born again, you cannot see the kingdom of God. See, what Jesus is saying is like, I'm not playing games. And Nicodemus, I didn't come here to be in your club. I don't want to be in your club. But if you want to be in this thing called the kingdom of God, then you need to be born again. Now, I'll be really honest with you, I don't love the phrase born again. All right, and it's because that phrase has kind of been hijacked and it's been stolen, and culture has kind of used it to refer to people that are kind of uneducated. So-and-so was lost and he was living this life and, but now he's been born again, and he didn't know any better, but now he's found this. And we treat it sort of like a hillbilly term, and I don't like that. It's been made political. And so when culture uses that, they sort of use it to refer to, like, have you seen Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Like when Delmer gets baptized and he says, come on in, boys, the water is fine, Delmer's been born again, and that's kind of the way. It's like got a hillbilly kind of tinge to it. Now, I can make fun of hillbillies because I'm from Kentucky, okay? Like, I get it, all right? But I don't like that that's the way that culture has kind of used that phrase. And honestly, the church has kind of misused it as well, and I don't like that. Like a lot of times in churches, we can talk about people who are born again as if they are just infants in spirituality, as if they're just getting started, and it's like, well, they don't know a lot about the Bible yet. They've just been born again. They're new at all of this. And that's not the way that this phrase was meant to be used, and that's certainly not the way that Jesus uses it. See, he's talking to Nicodemus, and he says Nicodemus needs to be born again. Well, understand, Nicodemus was very, very educated, as much and more than most anyone else in this day and time. He had spent his entire life studying the scriptures and being really well taught by some of the best teachers in the world at that time. And in fact, he had memorized the first 5 books of the Bible. All right, so Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, he knew all of it. All right, he would have been killer at Bible Bowl. All right, he knew everything. That's who Nicodemus was. And even with all of that knowledge, with all of that he brought to the table, Jesus looks at him and he says, Nicodemus, you need to be born again. Well, see, Nicodemus didn't really understand that. He thought that he had everything that he needed. And so he's got some questions. In verse 4-8, Nicodemus responds. He says, "What do you mean?" exclaimed Nicodemus. "How can an old man go back into his mother's womb and be born again?" And Jesus replied, "I assure you, no one can enter the kingdom of God without being born of water and the Spirit. See, humans can reproduce only human life, but the Holy Spirit gives birth to spiritual life. So don't be surprised when I say that you must be born again. The wind blows wherever it wants, and just as you can hear the wind but can't tell where it comes from or where it's going, so you can't explain how people are born of the Spirit." See, Nicodemus is kind of having a hard time wrapping his mind around all of this. He's like, what do you mean I have to be born again? Like, how can a man enter again into his mother's womb? Which is just disturbing. All right, we're not going to spend a lot of time there, but here's the deal. I love the way that Jesus kind of explains this, and he lays it all out. And he says to him, this is really good. He says, Nicodemus, like humans can only reproduce human life. That's all that we can do. But the Holy Spirit reproduces spiritual life. And now this is so important. All right, we need to get this. I want us to really understand what he's saying. All right, we get a lot from our parents. All right, so like your hair color, your eye color, all right, the shape of your nose, for better or worse, all right, that all comes from your parents, right? Your bone structure, your complexion, like all of those things we get from our family. It's kind of passed down to us. It's the reason, like this last week, I was playing around with this face app thing, and you guys see this, like where it can make you look old, and everyone you know posted a picture, all right? Myself included, all my friends did this, but it was kind of funny and a little scary, all right, because I looked just like my dad, all right, like identical. Like it was scary how much I looked like him, so much so that I know what the next 30 years entail, all right? Like this is where I'm headed. That's the reality, all right? I look just like my dad. And this is probably true for a lot of you as well. If you played around with that, we look like our parents. And the reason is because we get our DNA from our parents, from our family. It's kind of passed down to us, and so we get those characteristics. But here's one thing you did not get from your parents, you did not get from your grandparents, you did not get passed down from your family, is your faith. Your faith did not get passed down from you or to you from your family, from your parents. You didn't get that, all right? They can't force their faith on you. They can't pass down their faith to you. Like you are not born a Christian. No one is. It doesn't work that way. And for a lot of you, like maybe you understand that and you totally agree. Like you grew up outside of church and far from God, and it was a really long time before you came to meet God. And so you're like, yeah, like, man, I for sure was not born a Christian. I was born way far away from any of that. But there's others of us, all right, that maybe you grew up in church and you've always gone to church. And your parents went to church and you've been going with them since you were little, and it's been a really long time. And they believed in Jesus, so you believe in Jesus. And it's just kind of been what you've always done. And so you think since they were good with God, like, well, that means that I must be good with God because this is what we've always done. See, that's the reason that growing up in church can be really dangerous. All right, because when you assume that because they're good with God, that you're good with God, you're assuming things about your relationship with God that aren't true. And it's really, really dangerous. See, here's the truth, that you can be born into church, but you can't be born into Christianity. They can't make you good with God. All right, they can't make you good with salvation. They can't do that for you. And so maybe your mom or your dad or your grandparents, they loved Jesus and they really wanted you to love Jesus too. And so they set you up on a path to help that happen. And maybe they had you dedicated when you were little and you were sprinkled, and maybe they even later on even put you through a class where you learned a lot about that. I want to tell you that is awesome, and that's a great thing that they wanted that for you, but that's not good enough. And that does not mean that you are good with God, and that does not mean that you have this relationship with God. It is not the same thing because they can't give you your faith. They can't pass that on to you. And they can set you up on an environment that makes that more likely to happen. And they can put you on a good path where you can meet Jesus and you can start a relationship with him, but they can't do it for you. I know a lot of parents really wish that they could, all right, that they could just snap their fingers and their kids would have faith and they would believe in God. They probably wish they could snap their fingers and make their kids do a lot of things, all right? But it just doesn't work that way, all right? No, you can't do it for your kids, just like no one can do it for you. You have to be the one that chooses a relationship with Jesus. That's the only way that it works. Now, this was really hard for Nicodemus to understand, all right, because Nicodemus was related, he was Jewish, which means that he was related to Abraham, which is a really, really big deal. See, Abraham was a huge, important guy in the Old Testament, and God had made this promise to Abraham that he was going to bless him and make him a blessing to all these nations and create a nation of people. And Nicodemus was part of that family. Like, he was related to Abraham, and he thought that just like Abraham had trusted and all that stuff, that he thought he was good because of that, because of who his family was. But Jesus says to him, Nicodemus, all right, it doesn't matter who your parents were, and it doesn't matter who your grandparents were or that they had faith. It doesn't even matter that you're related to Abraham. None of that makes you good enough. You need to be born again. And again, this was really hard for Nicodemus to understand, but he does something that I hope that we'll do today, that we together, all right? Nicodemus didn't get defensive. He didn't try to argue, but instead, he considers it. See, look what he says in verse 9. It says, how are these things possible? Nicodemus asked him. See, he came in thinking one thing, right? He had this idea in his head. He had thought this his whole life, but now Jesus is challenging that. And Nicodemus considers that maybe there's more to this than I'd always thought. Maybe I've been wrong about some things. Maybe I've assumed some things that really aren't true. And maybe I need to listen to what you're saying. And so Jesus really wants him to get this. He wants him to understand it. And so Jesus tries to put it in a way that Nicodemus will understand. He tries to speak his language. And so look what he says to him in verses 10 through 15. Jesus replied, you are a respected Jewish teacher, and yet you don't understand these things. I assure you, we tell you what we know and have seen, and yet you won't believe our testimony. But if you don't believe me when I tell you about earthly things, how can you possibly believe if I tell you about heavenly things? No one has ever gone to heaven and returned, but the Son of Man has come down from heaven. And as Moses lifted up the bronze snake on a pole in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, so that everyone who believes in him will have eternal life. Excuse me. Now, we read that and it's a little bit confusing, all right? Jesus is saying some weird things. He's talking about a bronze snake that's been nailed to a pole and held up, and it's like, what is going on? Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to us. But here's the thing. Nicodemus knew exactly what Jesus was talking about. He knew this story, and Jesus knew that he would recognize him. See, Nicodemus grew up memorizing all these, and this is a story from Numbers chapter 21. And the story, which Nicodemus knew, was that Israel, the people of God, had sinned and rebelled against God. And because of their sin, God had sent these snakes into their camp, which is like the worst nightmare I've ever had, all right? But they've got all these snakes going around. These snakes are biting them, and people are actually dying because of it. And so they recognize their sin, they repent, and they come to Moses, and they're like, Moses, can you go to God and ask him, is there anything we can do to be saved from our sins, to be saved from these snakes? Like, what do we do? Well, God comes and he says, here's what you need to do. You need to take a bronze snake and nail it to a pole, and you're going to hold that up in the air. And so if anyone is bitten by one of the snakes, what they need to do is they need to look to this snake nailed to a pole and look to it, and that's when they'll be healed and they'll be saved from their sin, they'll be saved from the snakes, and they won't die. That's what they need to do to be saved, is look to the snake on a pole. Now, I don't know if you see this or not, but that's some major, major, major foreshadowing to Jesus being crucified and going to the cross for us. And see what Jesus is saying to Nicodemus and what he's saying to everyone and what he's saying to all of us, to everyone who's ever lived, is this, all right? Is that everyone has been bitten by the snake in Genesis 3, and sin is the venom. You see, in Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve first sinned and sin entered the world, it affected everything. And just like venom, that sin is in all of us, and it's affecting us. And the only way that we can be saved, the only way we can be saved from that venom, from that sin, is by looking to Jesus on the cross. So we look to him crucified for our sins, where our sins were paid for, and we believe in him. That's the only way that we can be saved from our sin. That's the only way. Now again, for Nicodemus, this was difficult. This challenged his entire worldview because Nicodemus was a Pharisee, which meant that his entire life was built around rules and rules on top of rules, all right? They kept all these rules in the Old Testament and even man-made rules on top of that to the letter. All right, that was what Pharisees did. He was an excellent practitioner. And so they actually had the laws of God, but then 640 other laws on top of that, and their whole life was dedicated to trying to keep those. And as much as they tried, they couldn't do it accurately, but this is what Nicodemus trusted was going to save him, was trying to keep rules. Now, we can say that's crazy, but the truth is a lot of us kind of live the same way. And that if I ask you, what does it mean to be a Christian? And how do you know that you are a Christian? For a lot of us, sometimes we slip into this way of thinking that, well, it means that, like, I don't cuss, at least not very often, not around kids, like I don't do that. It means that, if I'm not married, then I'm not going to have sex with anyone unless I do get married, And if you are married, it means that you're faithful to your spouse and them only. That's, kind of what it means. It means, like, I'm going to tithe out of what I get, I'll give to the church. It means that I'm going to serve and volunteer in the church, and I'll try to attend as much as I can. And, I'm going to try to be a good person and do all of those things. Like, that's what it means to be a Christian. But here's the thing. Nicodemus did all of that too. And Jesus is saying to him, Nicodemus, that's not good enough. You can't be good enough to be saved. And see, here's what that kind of tells us, is that you can serve in the church, but you can't serve your way into Christianity. You can't do it. You can't earn your way. You can't be good enough. You can't work your way in. You can't do enough to deserve salvation. It just doesn't work that way. And then Jesus kind of he drops this little line here in a minute in John 3:16. But before he gets to that, I want you to think back to that snake story. All right, the snake story that we told earlier, because if you're like me, I'm terrified of snakes, all right? Like, I don't like them. I run from them. But I like to watch snakes on TV, all right? So, I get really into these adventure shows. And I don't know, do you guys know who Bear Grylls is, or, Les Stroud? Or maybe you remember Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, back in the day. These guys they do outdoorsy things. And so they would go and handle snakes and touch creatures that would terrify me, all right? Things that nightmares are made of. But they do all this, and, I always thought, worst case scenario, because I like to go camping and hiking and do outdoorsy things. I like all of that, all right? But I always thought, worst case scenario, if I got bitten by a snake, what I would do is I would just suck the venom out, right? That's what they do in movies, and it make for a great story, and so, that's what I would do. But my man Bear Grylls told me that is not what you should do, all right? If you get bitten by a snake and you try to suck the venom out, it's actually only going to make it worse. It's going to damage the tissue, the venom's going to spread faster. What you need to do if you get bitten by the snake is go to a hospital, all right? That's the only place to go. That's where they have the antidote. That's where you go. But here's the thing. If you come to church because you think God is taking attendance, and you try to give a little extra because you've sinned a little extra, and you try to serve because you're trying to balance out this cosmic scale, then it's very likely that you're trying to suck the venom out of a snake bite, and you're just making it worse. Jesus says the only thing you can do is look to him to be saved, only through him. And as I said a minute ago, we jump to this verse that we all heard and we all know in John 3:16. The most famous verse. Even if you've not been around church, you've heard this verse and you probably have it memorized. But I don't want you to let that just kind of steal the gravity of what he's saying and the impact of what this means. I really want us to buckle in and listen to the words that Jesus says here. John 3:16. Says, "For this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life." Now, this is the most famous verse in the entire Bible for a reason. Right? It is the simplest and clearest explanation from the very lips of Jesus about what the gospel is that we get in the entire Bible. And what he's saying is that in the very, very beginning, God created you. He knew you, and he knitted you together in your mother's womb, and he knew you before you were ever born. And he created you. He created all of us with this standard of perfection. And every single one of us, every person who has ever lived on planet Earth has fallen short of that standard. We are all sinners, and we are all separated from God, which means that we are hopeless, helpless, and headed to hell. Except God loved us. And he sent his son Jesus to live this perfect life that we could never live, and died this death that we deserve to die so that we could have a life that we could never earn on our own. That is the gospel. That is the greatest gift that we could ever receive. That's what Jesus is saying to us. And the only way that we can receive that, the only way that we can have that is through Jesus, through a relationship with him. Which means this, all right, we don't just need to know a lot about Jesus, We need to know Jesus. We need to actually know him, actually have a relationship with him. And there's such a huge difference in those two things of just knowing about someone and really having a relationship where you know someone. So I think back to like if you grew up around church in the 90s, we had these things called WWJD bracelets. All right, anybody, you guys remember those? Lego, do you guys remember those? Like what it stood for, if you don't know, is WWJD meant what would Jesus do? And it was meant to be this reminder about like if you're in a situation, you know, what would Jesus do? And you try to do the same thing, which it was well intended, all right, but it's really, really bad theology. Because what they're saying is like, you need to try to think, what would Jesus do if he were here? If he were in the situation, how would he handle this? And then you try to do the same thing. And it's sort of acting as if Jesus isn't here. Like if he were still dead. Like that's the way that kind of phrases things. So what would Jesus do is a really bad question. Instead, what we should be asking is, Jesus, what should I do? That's a better question. When you have a relationship with someone, that's the question that you ask because you actually know him and you interact with him and you pray and you talk to him and you ask, Jesus, what should I do? That's what you do when you have a relationship with him. And the creator of the world wants that kind of relationship with you. He wants to know you like that. And so a lot of you may think like, that sounds great and that's awesome, but how exactly do we get there and what does that look like? Well, it starts with just coming to Jesus in humility, that we humble ourselves and we come to him and we recognize that there is nothing good in your life that you have apart from him, that we were helpless and headed to hell apart from God. And with Jesus, that is no longer true. That with Jesus, we can have a relationship, we can be known, we can be saved. And so we come to him and we bow down low, but we reach up high. And we say, Jesus, I don't want to settle for where I'm at, but I want to change. I want to become more like you. Will you help me get there? And just like it says in Jeremiah 29:13, it says, when you seek me, you will find me when you seek me with all of your heart. Then when we seek God with all of our heart and we come to him, we'll find him and we'll have a relationship with him. I love the way Paul puts it in Philippians chapter 3, verse 7 and 8. He says this. He says, I once thought that these things were valuable, like all these things of the world, things I used to live for, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. For his sake, I've discarded everything else, counting it all as garbage, so that I could gain Christ. See, we count everything else as garbage compared to knowing Jesus. That's how valuable, that's how precious, that's how important that relationship is with him. So all these things that maybe we used to think were important, all these things that culture says really matters and this world holds up in high esteem, we count that as garbage. So that job that we work so hard for, man, compared to Jesus, who cares, right? That raise, that promotion, that college you can't wait to get into, whether or not your team wins, like grades, even other relationships that we hold so important to us. Compared to knowing Jesus, that's all garbage. That's what it means to know him and to love him and to have relationship with him. He wants that kind of relationship, that level of priority in each and every one of our lives. Now, let's jump back to Nicodemus. See, we don't hear a lot about Nicodemus after this for several chapters, not until chapter 19, towards the end of the Gospel of John. And see, at this point, this is after Jesus has been crucified, and Nicodemus shows back up. And we see him, he comes and he collects the body of Jesus because he wants to give him a king's burial. Now, this is significant, right? The same Nicodemus is very different from the Nicodemus that we saw in chapter 3, right? In chapter 3, he came in darkness because he didn't want anyone to see and he didn't want anyone to know. But now in chapter 19, he comes in the day. And he comes when all eyes are on this thing that's happened, all eyes are on the crucifixion, and he collects the body of Jesus to give him a king's burial, if only for 3 days. He wants to give him a king's burial, knowing that it's going to have a lot of consequences, knowing that it's going to cost him his reputation. People are going to probably persecute him. His status as a Pharisee is going to be gone probably. But he doesn't care because all of that is garbage compared to the Jesus that he's come to believe in. So today I want to ask you, do you believe in that Jesus? Do you believe that Jesus is who he says that he is? Do you believe that he'll save you? Do you believe that? See, here's the question that I hope that all of us can answer today. When did you first start following Jesus? When did you first start following Jesus? See, for a lot of you, you can remember and you know exactly when you first started following Jesus. You can think back to the day, you remember the conversation, you know when it happened, you remember when you got baptized, and when you started following Jesus, you know and you can tell us. But for others of us, maybe you would just say always, that I've always followed Jesus. Like my family's always done this, I've always gone to church, I've always been in this stuff, and so like I've just always followed Jesus. It's always been what we've done. And if that's you, if that's your situation, that's what you would say, then today I would love for you to replace always with today. That you make today the day that you start following Jesus. That it's no longer what your parents chose, and it's no longer what your grandparents chose, and it's no longer just this thing your family has always done, but that it becomes your thing. It becomes your relationship that you choose and you decide that today I am following Jesus. And the way that we do that is through baptism. It's a way that we do exactly what Jesus has done for us. It's symbolic. And so when we come and we get baptized, we go in the water just like Jesus went into the grave, and we die to ourselves. And just like Jesus resurrected when he came back from the grave, we come out of the water in that same symbolic way to show our faith in what Jesus has done for us. And so today, if you would say that it's been an always thing, that it's been what you've always done, but you want to make it your decision, let's do it today. And even if it's not always, maybe it's never, that you have never followed Jesus, that you've never taken that step, and church is new to you and all that stuff. Today can be that day for you as well, that you choose to follow Jesus, you submit to him, and you come and you get baptized today. That's my hope for you. Now, I don't want to talk anybody or force anyone into the water. That's not what this is about, all right? But if you're sitting there and right now you're having an argument in your head about why you don't need to do that and why it's not your thing and you don't need to take that step, I just want to let you know you should probably lose that argument. That today should probably be that day, that even if you're uncomfortable and even if you're nervous about it, we're going to have people up front who would love to talk with you and have that conversation, all right? We're not going to drag you in there. You get to choose, all right? But it's your choice, and you can make today that day. All right, let's pray. Father God, Lord, we thank you so much for being a God that has done for us what we could never do for ourselves. We were lost. We were hopeless. We had no future, and you came and changed everything. You died a death that I should have died so that I could have a life I could get no other way. Jesus, I pray today that you would fill our hearts with that you would break down barriers that stand in the way of that, and you would make us followers of you today. And that if we've been doing that and we are followers, man, just re-live in us with that passion to follow you and to have that in us. We love you and we praise you. It's in Jesus' name, amen.